This is the Italian Citizenship Podcast, hosted by Marco Permunian and Rafael Di Furia.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of the Italian Citizenship Podcast, presented by Italiancitizenshipassistance.com. Of course, we are back at it again with Italian attorney Marco Permunian. How are you doing today?
Good, how are you?
I am doing great, thank you. And today's episode is actually going to be a little bit different, and we are going to be talking about moving to Portugal as an Italian versus moving to Italy as an Italian citizen. We wanted to give a little bit of an overview of what this can look like, because many individuals who are interested in getting Italian citizenship by descent are interested in doing so for the purpose of being able to move to Europe. There may be many people who could be interested in moving to a place like Germany or Sweden, for example, but I can say that I actually know quite a few people who have Italian citizenship by descent and reside in Portugal. And as some of you may or may not know, I am actually one of those people. I personally reside in Portugal. I was living in Italy, and when the Italian Citizenship Podcast and Italian Real Estate Podcast started out, I was residing in Italy at the time, and due to various circumstances, I ended up needing to relocate to Portugal. But this is one thing. As a European citizen, you do have the ability to live in another European nation. I very much enjoyed my time in Italy and very often think about it and long for my beloved Italian food. As many of you know, I do quite enjoy Italian food, and it's been difficult for me to find good Italian food here in Portugal. Marco, I am rambling on here. These are things that I've talked about on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/Rafael Di Furia, Not Your Average Globetrotter. And so, Marco, can you tell us about some of the initial steps that somebody should take into account if they want to move as an Italian citizen from the US to Europe in general, regardless of what country they want to live in?
Becoming an Italian citizen, of course, allows you to live freely in any European country. That's why many people decide to pursue Italian citizenship. Like I said, not necessarily they want to relocate immediately, but a lot of people do want to relocate immediately. But even if you want to relocate in the future, Italian citizenship is one of the easiest that you can get in Europe if you have Italian ancestry. Now, like I said, Italian citizenship allows you to move to any European country without basically any sort of restrictions. However, upon arrival in the country where you want to relocate, it is advisable to register as a resident immediately. That's because it allows you to access many of the services that are offered by the government of that state. Among these services are healthcare. So you are able to use the healthcare system of that state if you're registered as a resident in that state. Spousal benefits. So your spouse is able to obtain a residency permit for spouses if you are registered as a resident in that state. But also getting an ID from the local government is something that you can normally do if you are a registered resident of that state. And many people have been asking me, can I be registered, at a European level or simultaneously in several countries? Unfortunately, you can only be registered as a resident in one country at a time. So if you decide to relocate to Germany, for example, as an Italian citizen, and you register as a resident together with your family in Germany upon arrival, and then decide to relocate to Spain from Germany, you will have to register yourself and your whole family again upon relocation to Spain. So you can only be registered in one state at a time, and you can travel freely in the other European countries if you are an Italian citizen. However, your spouse, if your spouse is not an Italian, they can only travel for up to 90 days in the other countries in the European Union. And if when you're traveling, you decide to move to a different state, and if your intention is to move there permanently, then you should register yourself in the other state upon relocation, and then your spouse can also obtain a new residency permit, for example, in the state where you relocate. Every country in Europe has slightly different rules. For example, it could change the entity where you register. For example, in Italy, that's the municipality, or the procedure to register could be different. And that's what we're going to talk about in this video. And specifically, we want to talk about the differences between register as a resident in Italy versus in Portugal.
Yes, there's some very interesting differences between the registration processes and necessities, and also what can each allow you to have access to. Because if you do register in Portugal as an Italian citizen, there are certain Italian services that you might not necessarily have direct access to, just as the same as if you were living in Italy, there might be certain Portuguese services that you might not have direct access to. However, as a resident of either country, you have the rights basically as a full citizen, other than maybe if you are an Italian citizen living outside of Italy, your rights to vote would not necessarily be the exact same as somebody living in that country as a citizen. But Marco, as maybe a little bit of a baseline to go off of, comparing living in Italy as an Italian versus living elsewhere in Europe as an Italian, specifically in this episode, Portugal, can you give us a bit of an overview about what that residency process looks like for an Italian citizen?
Like I said at the beginning of the video, it is highly advisable to register yourself upon relocation, because there are several services that you will obtain access to if you register immediately. And also, just to quickly clarify this point, there is no European passport, meaning when you become an Italian, you don't get a European passport, which is a question that I'm always asked. You get a passport of Italy, which is a country in Europe. And the same goes for Portugal or any other country. If you get citizenship in that country, you will get a passport from that country, which is part of the European Union, not a European passport, meaning you have freedom of movement in the European Union, but you need to register in the country where you relocate to access these services offered by the government of that country or offered by the European Union in that specific country. But back to your question, how do you register in Italy? So the very first step is to visit the municipality where you intend to relocate, where you have actually relocated. So the first step is to visit the municipality where you have relocated. For example, if you have decided to relocate to Milan, you will have to go to the municipal offices in Milan. If it's a larger city, you will have to identify the office that covers that specific area. Otherwise, if it's a smaller city, like Rovigo, where my office is located, you will have just one municipal building that you have to visit. And the first step is to download the forms on their website to initiate the registration process and to fill them out with your information, your family's information, if you have family members that are traveling with you. And you will have to indicate if you own the property where you live, or if you have a rental agreement, or maybe a contract that allows you to use the property for free. So you will have to indicate how you're able to legally use that specific property that you're using. You will have to indicate, of course, the address of that property, number of family members that are living there with you, potential other people that occupy the apartment or house where you moved in. And then you will have, of course, to attach your ID. And the residency process can be initiated for free. So there is no fee associated with the residency process in Italy. Now, unless you obtain it before moving to Italy, you will also need a tax code, a fiscal code, in Italian Codice Fiscale, that can easily be obtained through an Italian consulate abroad before relocating to Italy. But it's also possible to get it while living in Italy. Now, it's more convenient to get it to the consulate, even if the processing time is a little bit longer, because you might need that fiscal code to enter into a rental agreement or to purchase a property. But if you were able, for example, to enter into a rental agreement without a tax code, which was more the norm in the past, now it's unlikely that you will be able to do so. Then you can get also a tax code while in Italy through the revenue agency, and the tax code is absolutely necessary when registering as a resident. Now, once you've filed your application to register as a resident, the municipal police will visit your property to make sure that you live there, that the property is habitable, and to check the ID of the people who live in the property. So you can expect a policeman, a municipal policeman, to stop by your house anytime from the registration to 45 days from the registration to see if the property is habitable and if it's a real residency, basically. So if they come to the house and the house is not furnished, or if the people are not really there, the people that you declared were going to be living there, that's going to be a problem. But so that's the sole purpose of the visit. And that's something that happens in Italy, but not in many other European countries, as Rafael can confirm, right, Rafael?
Yes, that is actually probably the biggest difference between, or one of the biggest differences rather, between the process in Italy versus the process in Portugal to gain residency as an Italian. I remember even during my residency appointment here in Portugal, I asked the clerk at the city hall, when should I expect, or how do we figure out the arrangements for the police check? And she just looked at me, he's like, huh? What are you talking about, police check? I was like, the residency, like when the police come to the apartment, they open your cupboards to make sure that you have food, or they look in your bedroom to make sure you have sheets on the bed. Like I was trying, because my Portuguese, it's not the best now, but it was even worse when I first arrived. And I was trying to explain in my broken Portuguese, and she just kept getting more and more confused. She's like, where do you even think we are? I was like, well, this in Italy is normal. She's like, oh, you do that in Italy? I can't believe that. Anyway, so it got into a whole funny conversation. But some of the factors when you are moving to Italy are similar to what you might experience in Portugal. However, they're expressed in a slightly different way. And then also, before I get into the residency itself in Portugal, there is another factor that you do have to consider, that you will be living as an Italian citizen outside of the country. So registration with the IDE will be necessary. We recently made an episode on the update about the IDE system, but we've also done a full episode on registration with the IDE in the past. So in Portugal, regardless of where you live, as long as you are on the mainland, and I believe it's the same if you do live on one of the islands, that you would have to register with the embassy in Lisbon. But when we are talking about actually getting Portuguese residency as an Italian citizen, there is a little bit of a difference between what you as an Italian will experience versus someone from a third-party nation. Someone from a third-party nation will have to go to the border agency and deal with them. In Portugal, that's been changing, and so I realize I'm sharing maybe some extra details here, but whatever details apply to someone coming from the US are not going to apply to you in the same way, at least at the time of recording, and at least for the first 5 years. For the first 5 years of residency, you will do this through the city hall. The first thing that you will want to make sure that you have ready to go will be the Portuguese tax code, the NIF. NIF, N-I-F, is the term that is also used in Portuguese, which is short for Número de Identificação Fiscal. So it's like a codice fiscale in Italian. You'll need to make sure that you also have your passport, but not only your passport, a copy of your passport as well. And you'll need to write on the copy of your passport, like to the side of it, your education level, your civil status, like if you're single, married, divorced, whatever it may be, unmarried. And you do need to write this in Portuguese, as well as your names of your mother and your father. And because you are going to be registering your residence as an Italian in Portugal, you will also need your proof of residence. And that can come in a couple of different forms here. Theoretically, you could do this with your rental contract or the purchase documentation of an apartment or a home in Portugal. But what also exists is something called an atestado de morada, the attestment of your residence or where you live. So in some cases, though, you may want to have that to begin with, and the atestado is something that you get from the Junta de Freguesia, and that is, in Portugal, you have your regular city hall, but then each neighborhood in many cities, you will have a local council for that area which you live in. And so you may have to go to your local council to get this proof of residence, and it costs a few euros. And another, actually, a big difference that can be between the residence in Italy for an Italian citizen versus an Italian citizen in Portugal is that the residence does have a fee associated with it. It could depend on where you are, but I would say, if I remember correctly, in my own personal experience, it was maybe 15 euros maximum. And the whole process was about maybe 20 minutes total. I had to go to a clerk, pay the fee, bring the receipt back to the clerk, and it was all done. This next thing that you need will actually be a surprise to many people because many people are under the impression that you're a European citizen or citizen of a European country and that you have the right to be anywhere. The thing is, you have the right of freedom to movement and you do have the ability to live where you would like to live, but you still do have to abide by the rules of registration and being able to show that you do have the ability to actually support yourself. So you do also have to bring with you proof of income. So that could be a local employment contract, or in my case, I was also able to use bank statements from my bank in Italy from when I had been working there, or proof of some sort that you have resources enough. So you want to show, even if you have a Portuguese bank account, that you can show them statements from a Portuguese bank. It is possible to get a Portuguese bank account as a non-resident. It's becoming more difficult, but doable. I would say it is better to have all of your registration set up first, that you are actually a resident here, because there are going to be certain things that would be very difficult. But also it's really important to keep in mind that this is not, you're not being put in some sort of extra special situation because you're Italian. Any other European would have to do this. And even if a Portuguese citizen were to move to Italy, they would have to show their financial situation, just as you as an Italian citizen have to show your financial situation here in Portugal. So this is quite normal within the European Union to have to kind of have this ability to show this. What they might be looking for is to make sure that you at least have enough to live there for a certain amount of time. There's no set rules for this, but I would at least take into consideration what the minimum Portuguese salary is, and that is going to be changing over the next years. So depending on when you're looking at this, you may want to take a look at the Portuguese minimum wage, and you could just multiply that by 12 or multiply that by 6 or multiply that by 3, or somehow show that you do have that amount coming into your bank account, and or at least available to you, so that they're not going to be concerned about you becoming a liability on the local system. That's the biggest concern that any European country would have, would be that another person coming in to be a liability on their system. Another thing to consider is that if you are a student, an adult student coming to Portugal, that you will need your matriculation certificate, Certificado Matricula, and that will be basically your proof that you're a student, your student ID of sorts, or your student way of showing that you are a student at a university here. But if you are a minor, or you're bringing your minor child with you, you will need also their birth certificate to register that as well. If you are a single parent bringing your child to Portugal, then you will also need to show that you have custody, that you have some paternal power that allows you to make these decisions. Or for example, I believe for Brazilian citizens, if you have the authorization of exit from the country, that is something that may possibly be able to be used in this situation. For those from the States, in some countries around the world, if you are leaving with a minor child, but only one parent is leaving with the minor child, you'll need written consent and authorization from the other parent to allow them to. So that might be a little bit of a different idea than what some Americans might be used to. So in all actuality, yes, there are a lot of pieces of the puzzle, but it is a very doable process. You will need your proof of where you're going to be, like your rental contract, your Portuguese tax code, your passport or European identity card. They will often ask you specifically for the passport. I personally did try to use my identification card, and the clerk at the city hall said that she specifically wanted the passport. So some of these things could be up to interpretation, and you will want to take that into consideration. And then on top of that, you will at the very least need your proof of income or your proof that you are financially stable. So you will also need to make an appointment, generally speaking, and there could be that information if you go to the city hall specifically and ask for that. They might be able to give you a phone number or an email, depending on where in the country you are. Each different city hall could take care of this in a little bit of a different way. Again, there is that fee that is also associated with the registration. And then also, one last little tidbit that I'm going to include here is that if you are going to be moving to Portugal, that currently, as the rules are set, that if you reside legally in Portugal for 5 years, you will be eligible for permanent residency or citizenship. And so that's a factor that you may want to take into consideration, that having Italian citizenship could be a pathway to getting Portuguese citizenship if you are interested in that, of course. And also, there is currently a linguistic requirement of A2. So it is a little bit different than Italy, where you would have otherwise a different set of circumstances, and if you are a European citizen moving to Italy. But it is worthwhile taking that in consideration, that you have also that ability after a certain amount of time. However, if you would like residency rather than citizenship, you will have to go through a different process beyond that. And currently that will end up going through the Portuguese border authorities, but the border authorities are reforming currently. And so that information can and will be changing as time goes on. But Marco, we're talking about residency. Why would somebody even want to be legally residing in Italy or Portugal? What are the benefits for somebody to be a legal resident in Italy?
So being a resident in Italy allows you to use most of the services offered by the government. Primarily, you will be able to use the healthcare system. So you're only able to register with the healthcare system if you are a resident of an Italian municipality, meaning even if you are an Italian citizen and you move from the US, for example, to Italy, without registering, you wouldn't be able to use the healthcare system. And the healthcare system in Italy, as we all know, is one of the best in the world. And you can register easily by visiting your local ASL office, which stands for Azienda Sanitaria Locale, which basically means local health service provider. And the registration process is very easy. If you are an Italian residing in Italy, you just need to submit an application and you will be registered almost automatically. You will be assigned a general practitioner, which you will be able to choose and that you will be able to use for, prescriptions, and if you need, general doctor's appointments. And normally what happens is that the general practitioner, if you need special doctors, they will indicate to you which one is best to you in your specific circumstance, and you will be able to visit also free of charge or at a very low cost a special doctor in Italy. Of course, Italy also uses a private system, so if you want to see a private doctor, that's also very easy to do, and actually is becoming a popular avenue to expedite the waiting times. And of course, you can also see a private doctor if you wish to do so. That's also a very popular option in Italy. But using the public healthcare is always convenient because the fees are very low, minimum or non-existent in some cases. Even if at a very minimum, you'll probably be required to pay the so-called ticket, which is normally a fee that you pay when you go to the hospital or when you go see a doctor in Italy. Not the general practitioner, that's completely free of charge. But if you go to the hospital, if you have to see like a special doctor for whatever you need to do, you may be required to pay a ticket. Being registered as a resident in a municipality also allows you to get an ID, meaning you would not be able to get an ID through a municipal office if you were not registered as a resident. And so that allows you to carry your ID with you, for example, rather than your passport. And Italy now gives to its citizens and residents an electronic ID. And the government in Italy now has introduced recently a plastic ID, so an ID that is the size of a credit card, so that is much easier to carry around. And also being a resident, for example, allows you to get some tax benefits when purchasing real estate, meaning that if you reside in Italy and you're purchasing your first home in Italy, you will have a 7% tax deduction, which is, of course, not insignificant. So being registered as a resident gives you several benefits. And the very last one before I pass the ball to you is the ability to have your spouse obtain a residency permit in Italy. meaning that only if you are an Italian legally residing in Italy, your foreign non-European spouse can get a residency permit to live in Italy together with you.
That's very interesting, all these extra details there, especially regarding healthcare. And that's the thing, is that if you are going to be an Italian citizen living in Italy, you will also get not only the European blue card, but you'll also get the local health card, but basically they're kind of one and the same anyway. In Portugal, however, that differs a little bit. Once you have your residency here in Portugal, you will need to register what is called the Centro de Saúde, or the Unidade de Saúde, and that is done through the Portuguese national system called the SNS, the Sistema Nacional de Saúde. And in Portugal, actually, the system here is quite robust in many ways, and you have the ability as well to call to the national hotline for not only medical emergencies for like physical harm, or like, for example, if heaven forbid you break a bone, but for example, also mental health emergencies, you are able to call to the national health line and be able to have a call with them as well. Through the SNS, there is an application within the national system here that you'll be able to access all of your prescriptions, whether it's for medications or even if it's for a test, whatever it may be, like a blood test, for example, or a cardiogram. It could be anything. But another benefit of being registered as a resident in Portugal, like I mentioned before, is that eventually, after 5 years of legal residency that is documented, that you would be able to become a Portuguese citizen. And that, I would say, is quite a big deal if you are going to be living in the country. Is it something that is necessary? Absolutely no. But at least at this moment in time, if you're an Italian citizen, you don't have to. But I personally am of the opinion that if you're living in a country, it does not hurt to have the citizenship. But as an Italian citizen, you basically have the same rights on a day-to-day functional basis as a Portuguese national would have. The only real difference, like I kind of mentioned before, might come in the form of voting. Theoretically, an Italian could have the right to vote for local elections, but that gets into a more complicated subject and not even worth jumping into in this episode. But because we're talking about an Italian citizen living abroad, we also have to talk about being registered with the IDE, and the benefits of being registered with the IDE is that if there's an emergency situation, that you have the ability to have certain access to the Italian embassy and consular services. If you need to renew your Italian passport while you're living abroad, being able to have the access to the Italian consulate embassy here in Portugal would be necessary to have, and you'll need to prove that you're actually living here in Portugal, as well as registering for the IDE itself. You will have to have had gone through this residency process, and then also access to whatever services through the consulate that you may need as time goes on, as well as your ability to vote in Italian elections will be connected through that registration as well. So there are those extra benefits that you do get, and as well as, actually, just to go back to the healthcare cards here in Portugal, like I was talking about before. I know I'm jumping around a little bit, but the way that it's done here is that you have your healthcare number, but if you want the European coverage, you do need to have a special order for a European healthcare card, whereas in Italy, from my personal experience, it was an automatic thing that you were just given as an Italian citizen residing in the country, which had also your codice fiscale on it and your identifying details for the medical system. Of course, being registered as a resident in Portugal does make it easier when you are trying to sign up for bank accounts and other various details when you are living here. But Marco, I think this is going to be a great place to round out this episode because we've had a lot of detail that we've gone into. But if anybody is interested in getting their Italian citizenship so that they can move anywhere in Europe, how can they get in contact with you and your team?
People can contact us through our website, Italian Citizenship Assistance, or give us a call. Or numbers on the website.
Absolutely fantastic. And of course, if you're interested in more information about being an Italian citizen, getting Italian citizenship, or what you can do with your Italian citizenship, make sure that you are subscribed to this YouTube channel, youtube.com/Italian Citizenship Assistance. Of course, if you are subscribed to this channel, you are also automatically subscribed to the Italian Real Estate Podcast, another project that Marco and I collaborate on, where we talk about living in Italy, Italian real estate, rentals, and purchasing property in Italy. But of course, you can find the audio-only podcast on all of your favorite podcasting platforms of choice. But Mr. Marco Permunian, thank you so much for making yourself available for this episode of the Italian Citizenship Podcast. I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and we will see you all next time. Later.
Thank you.